Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to continue the same line of discussion because I strongly agree with it. My biggest concern in this whole space since the crisis, including Dodd-Frank, including Fed action or inaction, is what I think is clearly the continuation of too big to fail. Just by the numbers, concentration in our banking system has grown significantly. The four largest U.S. banks are 25% larger by assets today than they were in 2007. According to FDIC, the top four control 43% of all the assets. The top six U.S. banks have assets equal to about 63% of the U.S. economy. So just by the numbers, the threat is greater.
Let me first creating monopolies.
Yes. Let me first ask all four of you, do any of you consider that trend either positive or neutral, not necessarily negative?
Negative.
Anybody else disagree with that? Okay. Do any of you think if one of those mega institutions were threatened today, they wouldn't essentially be bailed out, that they wouldn't have emergency lending authority or some other means to continue without serious repercussions? Anybody want to offer an opinion?
They would be bailed out.
Anybody disagree with that?
Yeah, with the current situation, they would. I think there's some things that can be done, but in the current situation, it's unfortunately very likely.
I would say it would depend on circumstances. I think if one very large institutional loan would get into trouble, people might use Dodd-Frank powers and put that through a liquidation, if one in isolation. But the probability of that happening is nil. It's probably a crisis situation and all of them are weak. So I take your point.
Senator Vitter, let me just take a minute to explain to you why I'm sure that would happen. The Secretary of the Treasury would meet with his staff. They would tell him all the things that could happen, disastrous things. They don't know they're going to happen, but if you were the Secretary of the Treasury, if I were the Secretary of the Treasury, and someone came in and said, take the risk, what would you do? We have to set up arrangements under which that won't happen. We can't just depend upon the will of the Secretary of the Treasury,
right,
because he will be under pressure and he'll know or be told that terrible things will happen, right, if he doesn't do the bailout.
Right. Mr. Connie Brown?
The only thing I would add, I agree, I mean, the scenario you're describing is exactly what Dodd-Frank is designed to address. So this would be the not trial run, the actual performance of Dodd-Frank liquidation authority. And I agree with my co-panelists and with you, Senator Vitter and Senators Brown and Warren, that I think that the capital levels of banks today are so low that I can hardly imagine, even if it were a one-off situation with one of these multi-trillion-dollar banks, that we would see a seamless operation of the orderly liquidation authority. And so this is also a great concern for me.
Thank you. That's a perfect segue to my next question. As you know, in broad terms, I think the best response to avoid that is higher capital requirements for the mega banks. How do each of you feel about the current, now that requirement has improved, moved in the right direction. I don't think it's moved enough. How do each of you feel about the current capital requirements for very large banks? Dr.
Yeah,
Taylor?
no, I think higher capital requirements are a way to get at this problem. It may be the easiest way, but there's other ways too, which I just make a short pitch for. There's something in our bankruptcy code that could be amended and reformed to actually allow one of these institutions to go through bankruptcy and not cause a mess. There's a proposal called Chapter 14. One version came out of the House. Senator Toomey has been involved with another one here. I think it's really a good reform. It needs to be done anyway. And that would enable the Secretary of the Treasury, whoever has to make this tough decision, to say, no, staff, there's a chance it's going to happen, but we got this other approach. We got this bankruptcy thing that even a large institution can go through. That, I think, coupled with these capital requirement changes, could improve the situation a lot.
And I'm very open to that, and you certainly agree that those are not mutually exclusive. They can work together.
You know
Dr. Meltzer?
you certainly know my position on this, Senator Vitter. It's really, as I see it, a fundamental economic question, and that is, who will have the incentive to do the right thing at the right time? The people whose money is at risk, or the people who regulate them? The answer is the people whose money is at risk.
Thank you. Dr. Kupiec?
The current system of capital regulation we've got ourselves into is incredibly complex. It's hard to even know what the requirements are for firms. In fact, most of the large firms' capital requirement is being set by the Federal Reserve CCAR stress test, which is about to happen next week when the Fed, but you don't even really know objectively what the capital rules are. So while I'm for higher capital, I'm for much more simple, straightforward, objective measures of capital that regular people can understand, that you don't need
I agree with that, too.
don't need 100 PhDs to read through the rules.
Yeah, I agree with that, too. Mr. Connie Brown?
I'm not even sure a PhD helps you read through some of the capital rules that we have. So I think that it's true that Basel III does make significant improvements, but tripling very little just still leaves you with little. And here, I think substantial, dramatic increases to capital would go a very long way. And the reason, of course, is very simple. Debt is the contagion in a financial crisis. When there's uncertainty about the value of assets and questions about who owes whom what money and what are the consequences to the financial health of the firms interlocked together, that is the financial crisis. When equity plays a much greater role, well, that's the very nature of the contract that shareholders have entered into. And so I think this is a simple and clear solution that's not mutually exclusive with bankruptcy code. And I'd flag one other issue on the bankruptcy code. I think there are other exceptions besides even a Chapter 14 where assets and transactions have been written out of the bankruptcy code in derivatives and other kinds of financial markets that should be written back in so that we have a much clearer sense in the event of bankruptcy of who owes whom what and how they can participate in a more organized way without circumventing that and getting first in line just because your lobbyists before Congress were more effective than the other guys.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Donnelly.
Thank you.